we pivoting now. We are now a Tears of the Kingdom podcast because we're going to be talking about this game, I think, for a very long time because it's a big game and I'm chipping away at it slowly. But yeah, let me tell you, this game is real good. If you had any doubts, that the sequel to one of the best games ever made would be good, which people did, in all fairness.
That's fair.
Tears of the Kingdom has been an absolute blast to play. And that said, I've only played, I've put in maybe 10 to 15 hours in the last week. Like I've played quite a bunch. And it's interesting because I'm still scratching the surface, but I've seen so much stuff that I've done. And it's been such an interesting experience because there's been all this talk of like, oh, I can't believe Tears of the Kingdom it's a copy paste of Hyrule. Like, how could they do this? It's the same game basically. They've changed a few things up, and I hear criticisms like that, but I'm like, have you seen Hyrule? Have you seen how things have changed?
Gigantic as well.
Have you seen how this game has been expanded with Sky Islands in a whole nother area, which I won't touch on for spoiler reasons, but like the play area is huge in this game, and even Hyrule itself. I'm like, I've played Breath of the Wild through twice now, and like 100%ed it both times. I didn't memorize Hyrule.
Sorry, that was pretty cool. You were on a glider and landed right on your horse, and Link transitioned so beautifully. That was fantastic. Yeah.
It's just like I know Hyrule's the same, and I know if you've played the games, you'll probably be like, oh, this is this part of the map, whatever. But it's such a big play area. I can't fathom why people are criticizing that. Also, given that Nintendo have stuffed so much into the sequel. Like, I think I was saying to you, or I don't know who I was saying it to this week, that this game took 6 years to make, right? It's like, okay.
It's the longest gap between mainline Zeldas
ever. They probably took 2 to 3 years to get the story content down, and they just spent the next 3 years just polishing the shit out of it because even like, I'll touch on that quickly. So
I did see, just before you get there, I did see someone make a really good comment about how, having a base world allowed the Zelda team to kind of push the game in directions they otherwise wouldn't have been able to if they were creating, a whole new base for that thing to exist on. Having like this Hyrule and being like, okay, we have solved the issue of how do we get exploration to work? How do we get these like sight lines to work? Now let's just focus on mechanics. Giving them the time to do that. This game wouldn't have been possible if it took place in a completely different map. So that trade-off is completely fine with me, I think.
Yeah. So, if you missed our coverage last week, or we just touched on the opening hours of the game, or you have no idea what Tears of the Kingdom is. It's a sequel to Breath of the Wild. And I think the biggest change that comes in are obviously the mechanics that are introduced. So gone are, the things from the first game. You can't freeze time. You can't throw time bombs. You can't, I don't know what the ability is called, but you can't like levitate objects, but you can.
Technically.
So those, if you think like, oh, you're going to get those abilities plus new ones, the ones from Breath of the Wild are out of here, but they do still appear in some form. So I think probably the most important ability in this game is what is it called? The hand. I've actually gone blank now.
Ultra Hand.
Ultra Hand. Ultra Hand lets you, so if you're watching the video footage now, you see it lets you like pick up and move things like you could in Breath of the Wild, but in a very neat twist, you can stick objects together, which lets you do all sorts of crazy things. Like you can build vehicles. I haven't got there yet, but I know at some stage I'll be able to build like planes or gliders, or like I've seen on Twitter people build actual robots. I have no idea how they're doing that, but it is possible. You have another ability called Fuse, which lets you, in a similar manner, fuse 2 weapons together. And that in itself has been quite something experimenting. So again, if you're watching the video feed, you'll see I've got a big stick with a rock attached to it. You can do all sorts of weird combinations. I like one of my favorite ones is you get a gadget that spews fire. Essentially, you can slap it onto your shield, and every time you hold your shield out, it shoots fire in front of you, which is very cool.
Yeah.
And then you get another, I think the last ability called Ascend, which it seems very simple. Like it lets you look up at the ceiling and basically like clip through it to the surface of that ceiling, or come out on the other side. And when I first saw that, I thought it's going to be very like case specific. You can only be able to use it on certain parts, but that's not at all the case. Like you can use this thing
it anywhere.
You can use it anywhere. If the game, like I think when you look up at the ceiling, the game calculates like, is there a clear place
the
for you to come out?
The ceiling sort of has to be a sort of close-ish to you. It can't be like, this is like miles away,
Yeah, so there's a range, and I think the game just calculates, is anything on the other side? Are you close enough? Cool.
Yeah.
You can just clip right through it. It's insane.
Apparently, it was a cheat code in development. The devs just used it as a means to like get around quickly.
I saw that as well.
This is fun. Yeah,
and it's been invaluable. Like it's a weird thing because I do worry that when I'm playing, am I missing chunks of designed gameplay? But then I'm also like, but it's just really convenient to skip climbing certain things, But on that, so I think one thing I really want to talk about is how the fact that this game works on the Switch is like actual sorcery. Like when you are out in the open, so think about it. Breath of the Wild it's an open world. There's a lot going on. It can be pretty taxing on the Switch, which is not quote unquote next gen hardware. Even on its launch, it's kind of like for all intents and purposes, the power of a PS4 and Xbox One. Now, 6 years later, the game's still running, but it's also doing all this other stuff. Like there's a lot of physics-based things. You could have so many objects stuck together and it runs. Like granted, there are moments where I think if there's a lot going on, there's, yeah.
So I'm watching. If you're not watching the video, you're missing some prime puzzle solving from Matthew and Ashran. And
I don't know why that happened.
I really thought that would work. I was like, wow, this is genius. And
I don't know. So if you're not watching, there's basically a puzzle where I need to get across a chasm, and I've got a rail. I stuck a wheel to like a platform, and the wheel just went without the platform. It was very upsetting. But what I was saying is that the fact that this game runs, I have not had a single crash, anything like that. And just thinking about, I don't know, the sort of problem solving or polish it went into this game. Like for comparison's sake, I'm sorry to bring it up. I'm still playing Jedi Survivor on the side, which we know launched as a hot mess. Like I'm really enjoying the game.
Still's a hot mess,
But that game does things where I'm like, to your point, like, okay, Nintendo had Breath of the Wild as a base game to work off here. Okay.
Yeah.
Jedi Survivor had Jedi Fallen Order as a base game to work off. And granted, the development time was a lot shorter, like 3 years versus 6 years. But the amount of technical things I'm having in a AAA game from EA, like I've had, for example, my PlayStation just straight up reboots. I've had
Jesus, really?
I've had moments where I'm like, I don't know how to progress this puzzle. And I reload, it's like, oh, I needed to do like push this button, but the prompt just never came up, for example.
Oh, awesome.
It's like, just putting these side by side, which maybe isn't fair, but it's like the fact that
they're high class sequels, and they, one is definitely more of a showpiece of like, this is the pinnacle of what the Switch can do technically. This is them wringing out every little bit of it so that they can get all these wild combinations working. And Fallen Order is like, we only going to target new consoles because we think we require that power, and then under deliver on that aspect of it. So it's weird. Yeah,
it is so strange. But back to Tears of the Kingdom. I think so. All these tools said and covered. I hear people's criticism of it's the same high roll, it's the same play area, but the way you navigate it and the way Nintendo have included puzzles and different specific things, it's just like, it's unreal. Like I've put in 10 to 15 hours. I've done so much stuff. Like I've done one of the main quests. I've done a lot of messing around. And I think that's where this game really shines, is that it's not about, like, I listened to the kind of funny review of it, and I can't remember who said it, but somebody basically said there's no like traditional checklist of an open world game. It's not like, oh, you have to do this. Like, it's there, but it's not structured the same way. The way this game's designed, it just really pushes you to just explore and have a good time.
Yeah.
And I think the best moments of this are those where there's so many people playing, and at any point you can be like, so what are you doing in your game? Like, what's the last thing you did? And 9 times out of 10, someone's going to have a story or a unique moment that you've done something similar or you've never heard of before. Like, oh my God, that's amazing. Just the playground that it's put together here, it's incredible. Like,
I think that's the beauty of it. That was like the fun thing about Breath of the Wild as well. Sorry. Playing it at launch was just, seeing how people were navigating that world in different ways and in different orders and finding different things. I distinctly remember, like, a month into like chipping away at Breath of the Wild, everyone was starting to talk about Eventide Island, and everyone was like, wait, what the fuck is that? Like, where is that? How can I go there? And there's going to be moments like that with Tears of the Kingdom. Everyone now is hyper focused on, like, what can I build with these weird mechanics, and there's so many weird inventions that you're seeing shared on Twitter and stuff, and that's fun. But there's going to be moments where it's like, people are like, I just found this thing, like, underground or in the air. Like, what is this? Or
but even to that point, like, the fact that if you've not played Breath of the Wild, like, I think you'll still have an absolute blast playing this game. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Watch a YouTube video, just catch up on the story to know what's happening with Link and Zelda and this world. But you will miss small things. Like, I'm dying to eventually get to Eventide Island, because I'm like,
what's there now?
It must still be there, but like, what twist have they done to it? I mean, like, I went to, so the main story beats I follow, they sort of push you to do Rito Village first. And the story beat is, they're experiencing like very strange weather. It's cold over there. And now all of a sudden, this whole area that used to be this lush green, like breezy, windy, chilled zone is like covered in ice now. Look, probably the same landmass, but it functions completely differently, which is very cool. So it's things like that. I'm like, well, what's happening out with on Volcano Land? What are they doing that side? And what's happening out in the desert?
And what's happening at the fish people place? So I want to ask, and I don't know if you can answer it without like spoiling things, but there was a big thing made by Nintendo literally a day before this game came out about classic dungeons coming back, or more traditional dungeons coming back, because Breath of the Wild obviously had the divine beasts, which were dungeons, but they were a lot smaller than what people were used to in a Zelda game. And a lot of people, I think myself included, found that as like not bad, just like the points of the game that didn't really click with them. Have they brought back, quote unquote, like traditional dungeons in that sense?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not really spoilery, but I followed, like I said, I went to Rito Village. I've ticked off that main quest. And like, I'm not going to tell you what the MacGuffin is, whatever, but I do think it feels more like a traditional Zelda in that sense of like, there's a thing.
There's a thing you need to find, and it is in a dungeon.
And getting to, it's like one of my biggest criticisms of the base game is like, I loved the hell out of Breath of the Wild, but in terms of story, like, I think if you mainline that game, it would feel very content light. It's like, oh, okay, you go to, Rito, so I'm just going to stick with Rito Village. You go to Rito Village and it's like, oh no, there's this divine beast. We need to learn this cool ability and then like penetrate the divine beast. And that usually is like, that's like an hour or not even, just to like tick off some boxes, and then all of a sudden you're on the divine beast. And the divine beasts themselves were very cool. Like, those were big, cool dungeons. Like the main story beats I've done here to get to the first main thing, just like it feels that they've fleshed it out a lot more. Like getting
Okay.
there was way more of a journey. And then when I arrived, I was like, fuck yes. This is very
Okay.
cool.
Okay.
So yeah. And
That's
like,
cool. That's cool to know.
that-
It's not another divine beast, put it that way. It's not like,
No,
we made
but-
traditional dungeons and it's like the skeletons of the fucking divine beast.
Oh my God. But I mean, that's my only instance of an example. Like I haven't done anything else story-wise, but I have had moments where I'm like, shit, I feel like the scale is more epic. Like in terms of
Yeah.
story and quest, I'm like, I feel that they've ticked that box of they've made it more, what's the right word? Like not pertinent, but it's not like in the base game, it was just like, oh, cool, I did the Divine Beasts. I did it in like an hour, 2 hours, cool. But yeah, it feels like this is more of an event to get to the thing.
More involved.
Yeah. So I'm very keen to see what else they've done. But yeah, as for, I don't know if the game is stuffed with, 10 traditional dungeons or whatever, but it feels like there are Zelda dungeons, which is cool.
Okay. That's interesting to know. I'm curious to see, considering the kind of spin they've put on everything else, like them saying, oh, there's traditional Zelda dungeons. I don't believe it will be like, oh, this is like a very similar structure to Ocarina or Majora's Mask or Wind Waker, that are very traditional. I get the sense that when they say traditional, they're like, yes, it is a dungeon, quote unquote, but it's still, this is still our spin on those dungeons, just like the Divine Beasts were.
Yeah.
I get the sense that it's like, oh, they're traditional in the sense of length, because I think they realize that the Divine Beasts were very, very small dungeons compared to their previous efforts. So
yeah.
So
we'll see.
Curious to see. But I know there's also a bunch of stuff elsewhere in the game that, we don't have to talk about, because it is quite fun to discover those things on your own, in the same way that they were fun to discover in like a game like Elden Ring.
Yeah.
Giving away that certain things exists is part of the is part of the surprise. So yeah, we won't have to chat about that.
We can tune in a year from now. We'll do our spoiler cast.
Oh yeah. Well, no, I think we're going to be like talking about this game as we go, and eventually, like a month or 2 months in, we'll be like, okay, well, we're going to chat about this thing because it's really cool. And if you haven't got there, or you don't want to be spoiled, then you don't tune in for that portion.
Away. Yeah.
I definitely think we're going to be chatting about this for quite some time. So
yeah, it's weird because again, like I've played 10 to 15 hours. I've done so much, but I've simultaneously done so little.
Yeah, I've done everything, but I haven't really progressed much. Yeah,
but I think if you want to take anything away from this, is like I'm having an absolute blast. And I think I've seen criticism of if you didn't vibe with Breath of the Wild, like I agree, maybe you're not going to vibe with this. Like it functions the same, combat's still the same, the world's still like, even in terms of how like this game has shrines. There are shrines for you to do. Like structurally, it's very similar. So if you hated Breath of the Wild, I'm like, I don't know if you're going to now enjoy this. Like maybe
that's like the shrines give you the things to upgrade your life. So that sort of loop is still there,
But I can't tell you. Sorry. If you
the shrines are super cool, I think.
I think so.
It's kind of incredible how, because that was one of the parts where I was like, okay, there were 100-something shrines in the first game. I did all of them. How they're going to make those feel fresh? And it's like, oh yeah, well, you've just got all new powers.
You've got
like
brand
all the puzzles
new
are
tools.
completely fucking different. Yeah,
and
it's like, oh, duh, that makes sense. Yeah,
and it's still ticks that box of like, I know Breath of the Wild. Some of those shrines, some of the puzzles were like very straightforward. Like, oh, move this from here to there. Where here it feels like, you've got to do X thing, whatever, but how you do it, it's like, I think they're very smart in, at least from the first few hours, they're very smart in exposing these sorts of things you can do with the new powers that you might not have thought of. Yeah. And then that then enables you in the open world to be like, oh, okay, now I've got this new knowledge of how these two things interact. I can definitely use this, which I think, in the previous game, the abilities you had, obviously people
tore those things apart and started combining them in weird ways. But I think most players weren't using them in those ways. You know, they were using the bomb as a bomb and they were using the freeze as a freeze.
Yeah.
But here it's definitely about combining everything together. So yeah.
I'm
It's cool.
very excited to roll credits one day and watch people speedrun this game, because I can only
What's
imagine.
the current record? 90 minutes or something
I
ridiculous?
saw
like
94 minutes. I mean, if that's the first run, they're going to get it down like to.
Oh yeah. I mean, because you can do the thing where you go to Ganon and fight him. Although I think the big thing for the speedrunners now is like trying to find a way to circumvent that opening, because it's very long.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I wonder if the game opens with like a long walking segment with Link and Zelda. I wonder if there's a way to skip that.
Yeah, to just completely omit that. Yeah,
because
like the first game is pretty much wake up, walk out cave, and game is started. You know, so. Yeah, and then when people figured out how to get off the plateau without doing the shrines, that like cracked everything open. So I'm sure they'll find something. Yeah.
Has that happened though? Do people know how to get off the plateau without getting the abilities?
I think so.
Because I always thought
I think that was a big like hurdle that someone got past. They were like, they managed, because the game actively disallows you from doing that. But
look at this Darren guy playing Tears of the Kingdom.
I think there was, maybe I'm mistaken, but I swear I read that like they were like, oh, we finally got over that. Or
yeah, because that would be a huge.
Because otherwise you have to do all the shrines, so that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah. Cool, but I think, sorry, if some forewarning, you're going to hear a lot about this game in the weeks to come. I think we're both going to be checking in different capacities. But yeah, I'm absolutely loving it and very excited to play more over the coming months, because it's a beast. There's a lot to do in this game.
Just before we close out, I really love how extra the whole tower mechanic is in Zelda. Is like you get fucking ballooned into the air and you have to scan the surrounding areas as you plummet back to Earth, and potentially die if you don't figure it out. You know, it's really fun.
Let me tell
Ubisoft, take note.
You can go to these towers anytime you want and just yeet into the sky, and using it to look around and mark shrines and other points of interest, invaluable. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Also, very handy to get to nearby sky islands, if you never thought about that.
Smart. Yeah, because you actually get propelled further up than the sky islands.
You are so high. Yeah, man. But the fact that this game runs on the Switch is insane to me. Yeah.
I mean, there are moments of like slowdown, but they like, again, like if the game is good enough, you can push past it. It's not consistent. It's not persistent either. It's like, every now and then when I open up a power, it's like, and then it comes back, you know. It's like not terrible.
No.
And again, it's running on a handheld that is 6 years old now.
Just insane.
It's totally fun.
Yeah.
It's totally fun. It runs better than I actually expected it to. So, yeah.